Man, I think that church planting is God's plan A for the world. I think that there's not a plan B. I think that church planting is the means by which the Great Commission is accomplished. We are called to make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and teaching them. Those are church things. Those are not things that happen at the evangelism big rally. They don't happen through FCA. I'm not saying anything about, but I'm just saying that's church stuff, in my opinion. The authoritative teaching of the word, administering the ordinances of the church. Those things are meant to be going through the local assembly. Yeah. It's funny. With some of my counterparts, some of my friends in ministry, they're maybe lean more 9 marks or something like that. They might look at me like I'm just too big of a big church guy, like big C church guy. Yeah. But man, I think every single believer needs to belong to a local church, and that is the way, that is the vehicle. Church plants that plant churches will go all the way to the ends of the earth.
This is Breaking Barriers, where we help pastors and churches grow so that they can go.
All right, welcome to the Breaking Barriers podcast. So excited to be talking with Pastor Andrew Hopper today. I am Jonathan Yarborough, the executive pastor of Sending at Mercy Hill Church. And hey, today we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to talk some about a vision for sending and how all of that sort of comes about. A lot of times when I go out places, people want to know about our sending culture, and they're asking questions that are like, hey, what are the processes that you guys use to be able to see so many people sent out? What are the systems? And it always comes back to they're asking about a pipeline or a pathway, and they want to be able to take what we're doing and either take some version of that or the whole thing and just kind of lay it down inside their church, And it always comes back, though, that I ask them about what their vision looks like around that and who's casting the vision. Because what I have found is that you can have all the stuff that are just like laid down there with pipelines and pathways. Right. But if you don't have the lead person at your church that's carrying the vision, then you just don't have any engine to the whole thing. Mm-hmm. So I just thought it'd be great to start with talking about, hey, what does it look like for you? I mean, do you have an idea of how often you're talking about sending in front of the whole church? I don't, until you said you had someone go research it. Yeah. I don't know if you actually did that. Well, I didn't have them go research it. They just researched it and told us, yeah.
What you guys have told me is somewhere around 3 out of 4 times that I preach, something about sending will come up.
Yeah. Now, that's not necessarily that it's not a sermon that's on sending.
No, but it's mentioned.
Yeah, mentioned. Like when you're dripping some vision, you may be talking about, somebody that's just left our church, what's going on in a missionary's life, what's happening in this church plant, that kind of stuff.
Well, I heard a long time ago, Pastor Larry Osborne, who we reference a lot on this podcast, he said one time, he said, man, there's some things in your church that are too important to preach a sermon on. Mm. And what he meant by that was you need to figure out what those core things are for you and your church that don't need a sermon preached on them, although they do. You need to preach specific mission sermons, right? But the point is they need to just come up all the time. And vision's carried in a bucket that leaks. We all know that. And so there are a few things that I try to make sure that we're circling back to all the time. And I keep them top of mind, man. Like I have a little notes document in my phone that's just for illustrations. Like, so anything in my whole life that is funny or very gripping. I mean, from a movie to a story by a campfire to something that happens in my life to my kids being funny. I don't feel the pressure to figure out what it means. I just know that it would play well. It's a good story or whatever. I capture it, and so I've got a crazy document on my phone with this. But at the top of that document, it says a few things. Generosity is one of those things. Chosen ministry is one of those things. Sending is one of those things. Men are one of those things. It's just there are things that I need to when I'm formulating. Those things have got to drip. And I mean, ideally, I'd like to do it in every sermon. Right. So y'all said 3 out of 4 and made it sound like that was a good thing. But I mean, when I hear 3 out of 4, I think, man, that's not great. It should be 4 out of 4.
Well, consider this the gauntlet just kind of laid down.
Well, I'm going to lay it down.
All right.
Yes. Tell them to check me in about 6 months.
All right. That's awesome. All right. So at this point, with where our church is, We're getting ready to send out our 6th church plant. We just commissioned our 60th international missionary.
Right.
177 people so far have left our church. So some people they know some of these things about us, and they've like watched us in the last couple of years. What it feels like here now, it wasn't always like that. Didn't have the same kind of momentum. Can you talk a little bit about back in the early days when the momentum was not there? How were you talking about it then?
I think that we really bought into, and I hope that people who are hearing this podcast, communicators, can really think about how the pulpit is just the number one lever, for vision. And as you said earlier, it's like, man, systems and structure are the train track.
Right.
They don't have an engine. There's no juice.
Right.
The thing runs on vision, and now you got to make sure it runs the right direction with systems, but systems inherently don't make anything go.
Right.
Vision is what makes it go. We ascribe to the field of dreams principle in preaching. Okay, so got this from Keller a long time ago, but the basic principle is you have to preach to people who aren't in the room if you want them to ever be in the room. So it's the field of dreams, right? Preach it and they build it and they will come. Preach it and they will come. Man, we knew we wanted to be a sending church. And so, yeah, the momentum wasn't there because we had not sent anybody, we're a church of 100 people or whatever. But I would almost wonder if some of those early years, even that culture of preaching and talking about sending in the sermons was even hotter than it is now. Just as I'm thinking about it, which I want it to get hotter now, but I'm just saying back then, it may have even been better. My point is the fact that we had done it wasn't the reason why we were talking about it. And it didn't even really affect how we talked about it other than we had things to celebrate. Before we had stuff to celebrate from our own church, we still celebrated the heck out of stuff. We just had to do it through partnership. Okay. So that's how we did it, man. It's the same. My point is it's the same play. We would be celebrating things. We'd be casting vision for things, but they weren't things that were coming out of our church. A lot of times they were things at a convention level, or they were, we partnered with a church plant. So they came and preached and all that. They weren't our own guys. Yeah.
So you would still talk when you say you want to preach to the people who aren't in the room.
Yeah.
You're still talking about it as, hey, we are a sending church, not we want to be a sending church.
Yeah, this is who we are. Man, it doesn't totally look like it right now because of how small the church is or how young the church is, but this is core in our DNA. And, you keep preaching about it. We did not plant our first church until 2019. Now we partner with a bunch of churches and people call those church plants. They say we planted a bunch of churches. Well, we did that too. We partnered with a bunch. But we did not parent a church until 2019, but our church knew we were a church planting church from the jump. Yep. And so, yeah, it's the field of dreams principle in preaching is more about evangelism, like preach to college students, preach to, if you want a diverse crowd, preach to people. So, but I think it plays into what we're talking about now. You got to talk about it as if it's the reality, as if that's already what's happening in the room. Make sure there's examples of that through partnership, because it is happening. You're doing it but you're just doing it through partnership until you can do it on your own. Yeah.
All right. So take me back to when the very first person left Mercy Hill, was sent by Mercy Hill to go somewhere else. What did that feel like?
It felt really awesome. We had partnered very well. I think from the jump, we had people that were launch team that were already raising money to go, overseas when we got here. We had, I'm thinking of the two people. One we sent internationally, and that was it was a single woman that got to go. I felt like, she didn't have any of the structure you're talking about now, right?
The system wasn't there.
Now we have a whole team, and we have, people are going to be calling you, and they're going to be doing, but she had a smaller church that often sometimes will organically do those things, right? And so she went out. And that was, man, we celebrated that. It was awesome. And then we had our first family sign up to go on one of our church plants. And it was, there was actually a family that went with Ethan Welch, who's very much an active part of the Breaking Barriers kind of community here down to Wilmington. It was incredible. At our Christmas services, one year we brought Ethan in, we were partnering with him. And I just told him to go for it on the stage and just kind of push hard for some people to go with him. And he did right there at our Christmas services. Brand new people are probably like, this is the strangest thing in the world.
right.
I mean, I came here for candy canes and whatever, and
They're trying to get me to move to Wilmington.
you're trying to get me to move to Wilmington and give money to this guy who I don't know, who has the greatest Barry Manilow voice of all time. And so
I've never thought about that.
Oh, he's got
100%.
Oh, bro,
true.
he's got that deep voice.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, it was probably weird for the people that were there, but a family stepped forward.
Yeah.
And they had been with us since the beginning at Mercy Hill. They had come in. They had a connection to Wilmington. They were our first family to like pick up and move, and they went and helped them plant that church.
That's awesome. So a couple of questions around that. When you have that first family that moves, a lot of people think just about how awesome that is, that they would leave and they would take off. What does it really feel like?
Well,
When you're,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
he was on the setup. He was on the setup team.
Yeah.
She was a kid, one of our kids workers, and they were committed to tithe. And our church was 150 people or whatever. I don't know how big it was. It was small.
Yeah.
Smaller. And yeah, I mean, it's awesome on one hand, but it never. But one thing I think people think, Jonathan, I've heard this so many times. I think they think that when your church gets bigger, that you feel that impact less.
Right.
And that is not true. It's just not.
Yeah.
And I think people, they have this mentality of like, well, yeah, but you guys are a big church, so you can send people out that don't hurt. You don't even think about it anymore. And that's just not true. I mean, we stood on that stage just this past weekend, and we had two families that are going to the nations.
Mm-hmm.
On the stage.
Right.
You got one family, they both been here for more than 10 years, both the couples, okay? One of the families has adopted, husband is an elder.
Yep.
The other family, he's already been sent out once. They're integral in our college ministry. They both are at the Clifton campus, where it's like, man, they're just pouring out their life there. One of them has learned Spanish, and we have this Espanol. I mean, campus over there as well, like, it's going to leave a massive hole. I don't care if your church is 300 or 3,000 or 30 when people leave, there's a hole there. And it's that moment of opening your hands and just saying, God, we believe you're going to multiply this by your math. And so we send them out.
All right. So at some point, you have the first one that leaves, goes internationally, and then you have the first family that leaves. Now there's been a whole bunch more.
Yeah.
So when in that process did it start feeling kind of like this is normal? I mean, the first ones that go, they say, yeah, we're going to leave here and go somewhere else. It's like, okay, that's awesome that somebody did it, where we finally had it happen. Mm-hmm. But at some point it has to become like, oh, this is just what we do.
Yeah.
When did it start to kind of take on a shape like that?
Well, I mean, I'll answer that. I think it might be different than what you're thinking though, because for me, it was never not normative. But I think that was and for our launch team, but I think that's because of where we had the blessing coming from.
Right.
I remember I've told you this before, but it was funny when I was going around raising money. When you go plant a church, you're basically entrepreneur mode.
Right.
You're trying to get people to invest in what you're doing and going all over the place. Anybody will listen to you. Yep. And I realized 2 or 3 of my first meetings that I ever did, like in trying to get people to buy into what we're doing and partner with us and all that stuff. They talked about my church for like 1 minute, and then all they wanted to do was talk to me and grill me about the sending culture of the summit. And I realized, oh, this meeting was not about my church. This meeting was their way of talking to me about how to do ascending culture, which ironically, the answer is you need to partner with our church.
That's right.
But for some reason, many of them didn't understand that. But anyway, so for my point in saying that is it was always normative. It was just, man, this is what we're going to do. It's what we're coming to do. I don't think that's true for the average everyday believer, though, that is like in a church that's growing.
Right.
And I think it was weird, man. I think some people are like, this is strange. These people, I love these people. They're in my community group. Mm. They disciple my kids on the weekends, help us disciple our kids by programming and stuff on the weekends. And so I don't know when it kind of flipped to be more normative. I don't know the exact date of it. But I will say that part of our discipleship initiative in 2018, 2019 that was called Together. Yep. A bedrock part of that was creating we call it the runway, creating the runway for us to do our own church planning. Mm. And it was so funny how I think that when you tie up people's generosity and understanding that a big part of the vision is we don't want a partner to go, we want to go. Mm. Doesn't mean we don't have partnerships with organizations, but I mean, we want them to come from here. And I kept saying, our elders with our launch team, with team, money, all that, same thing with missions. Like, man, we're raising them up from here to go, and we're going to build through our generosity. We're going to build a ramp for that. I think that season just kind of embedded in our church's life. Like, this is a core kind of, it's just part of our identity. Yeah. If we're going to raise money on that, and that's going to be a big part of it, then, man, it is who we are.
Yeah. It's definitely become one of the things we celebrate the most.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you mentioned earlier talking about preaching.
Yeah.
With the sermon being the biggest lever
right.
that you have to pull when it comes to vision. And I've heard you talk about this in some other ways.
Yeah.
But what are some of the other ways that you have of going where you can cast vision like that?
Yeah.
It's not sermon.
I mean, this is a great question. I think we should camp on this for a minute because, so think about it like this. Preaching is the biggest lever we have, but it is not bigger than all the other levers combined.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
And a lot of times, all people think about it is preaching.
Yep.
And it's like, well, wait, that's maybe 50% of it. Now, it's the biggest one, and all these other ones kind of add up to what that one is, maybe a little more. But I mean, and there's 20 of them.
Yeah.
But they're still significant. I mean, that's big. If all you're thinking about is we're going to move people from the stage, is Ryan Britt's famous quote, you have weak leadership.
Yeah.
We have to have other ways of moving people and casting vision and that kind of thing. So
if guys aren't doing those other things that you're getting ready to talk about, then they're missing half of their ability to move people.
I think they're missing at least half.
Yeah. Okay.
If they do that. If all they're doing is relying on the first 3 minutes and then they've got an anecdotal story in the sermon, I think they're missing a lot of vision that can be left on the bone. And the reason is that people think about vision as something that you have. And what we say at Mercy Hill is like, no. Vision is something that you do.
Okay.
This is how I try to teach our guys. Like, vision, I mean, yes, you have vision. I get that. Like, I have a vision for my life, okay? But vision is something that you do. And it has to be something that you do, because if being in the lead seat or being an executive role like you are, or really, I mean, every role has this to some degree, but, especially in the higher level seats, if part of your job description is vision, it's obviously something more than you just have.
Right.
Right? I mean,
you have to do
Yeah,
something.
you do your job description.
Right.
Right?
You don't have you do have a
Yeah,
job.
you do.
But if you don't do your job,
You don't have components of a job description.
Yeah.
Like, you don't, that's not, it's, you got to do it. And so that's where I try to think about how to get people to understand doing vision. I think a good illustration of it, if I can, is so I like to read these homesteading books. We have a little farmstead or whatever. Okay. So, and one of them, kind of a legendary book, is this guy named Scott Nearing, who is a committed atheist and a committed communist, whom I normally don't quote. Okay. For good,
obvious reason.
For good reason. Okay. So, but he had this whole chapter on how he, quote, does health.
Okay.
And I remember reading that and being like, the first time I read it, I was like, that's not the right way to say that. The grammar's wrong or something. And then I'm like, no, that's what he's getting at. He's getting at health is not something you have. Health is something you do. And his point was, if you want to be healthy, you have to do it. So, like, what did that look like for them? Well, for them, they didn't eat any meat. I know you prescribed to that as well. You don't like to eat meat.
Can't stand meat.
Right. As
little protein as possible.
This going from the guy that likes to go to Texas Roadhouse because of the double chili as a side.
Love that stuff.
So they ate organic, only whatever. But then they committed to move their body for 6 or 7 hours every day through manual labor. Whenever they were going to dig a pond on their property.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
They're going to dig a pond on their property. Him and his wife just went out there and dug it with a shovel and a wheelbarrow for like 6 years.
Yeah.
I mean,
I've done that a lot too.
Yeah, right. So they built a barn out of stones. So they literally got the stones from the river and packed. I mean, it took them years. Okay. So my point is,
he was doing health.
He was doing it.
Yeah.
Okay. The question I think guys got to wrestle with here, and I want to get back to the point of like getting missions down in the organization. How are you doing the vision to get it down? Because, yes, we're doing it in the sermon. Hopefully we're doing it in the sermon, but there's so many other ways. People say, what do you mean? Like, I've always think vision is like sitting in a whiteboard writing. It's like, well, that's some of that. But really what vision is taking very seriously things like writing your quarterly giving letter in a way that's compelling and tells people who you are and what you're doing. That's what vision is. You're casting vision anytime you're communicating to the body or to other people who you are and what you're doing, or where you're going, really. You know, what the future is going to look like. Quarterly giving letters. Every time you go to an elder meeting, anytime you stand up before your community group leaders, right? Every time you have a staff prayer meeting. I mean, I could go on. I've got a list of 20 of these. I call them a vision trellis. But the point is, any time that you are in that communication mode, all of us are, I mean, most of us are pretty sharp people in terms of just speaking and stuff. Like, you can do that on the fly and have not thought about it at all.
Yeah.
Or you can do vision really well and have thought about it before you go in and have written it and have really thought about, how do I get the vision of our organization to stick and move people here? And for us, man, we just try very hard to not only drip the sending culture in the sermon, but you want it to drip all through all that. And so, man, it's very common for our quarterly giving letter to have something about how many missionaries we just had or commissioning. Like, I guarantee I'll put this commissioning that we just did in the next one. And our student ministry, I mean, you know, all these different areas, we're going to talk about the sending component of it.
Man, you just named off a whole bunch of things that a lot of guys will look at those things and they'll say, these are the things that if I'm going to get out of something, I might want to get out of having to do this.
Yeah.
And so the way that you're framing this up as like a moment for casting vision, that completely changes how you think about those things.
Right, for sure.
Yeah. So
you need to be out. You need to be out of it in terms of you're not licking stamps and figuring out people's address.
Yeah, that's right.
But dude, you don't. It is. I mean, the lead guy. Anytime where there is, who are we and where are we going? So whatever you're doing for social media, you know, whenever you start thinking about, you know, once a month we have an all-staff meeting where even our elders can come. It's like, you're going to get some of that time. Have you thought about communicating who we are and where we're going and how you're going to communicate that? So there's 1,000 ways that works out, but I would be wanting to get out of the details of it, not the content of it.
All right. So, hey, let's shift gears a little bit. I kind of want to get at how you sort of developed your heart for sending that is largely targeted at the nations. And can you talk a little bit about how that was shaped in you?
Yeah, so we are huge advocates here, and you've done an incredible job with like the vision of this too, with y'all's team of short-term trips. I was shaped in a short-term trip culture. We just, for whatever reason, my uncle was an independent Baptist missionary. He was a guy who equipped missionaries, and he started taking my dad on different missionaries journeys when I was very young. And then our church got into that when we were going cross-culturally, although it was in the same country, when we would go to Native American reservations in Montana when I was very young. So at 12 years old, I learned how to play the guitar so that I could go do vacation Bible school on the reservations out there. And I did that for 10 years.
Okay.
So I did it every summer for 10 years. And that's a big jump. It's going from 12 to 22. A lot changes in your life in those times. Yep. But one thing was constant, and that was, man, I was going. Even my summer of my senior year, right after I graduated as a high schooler, I lived on the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation for over a month. And, you know, so my heart was very much getting tied up. Didn't understand a lot about God, peoples versus people, you know, like nations, but I knew we were going, and I had a real love for that. Raised in a really small but strong church in North Florida that preached missions. But then when I got in seminary, I had the opportunity to take a missions class, which is why I love what we're doing with Envision. We have a class starting where we're going to try to do like a real high-level overview of the nations and what God is doing among the nations. But that class, it just clicked for me where I just begun to realize, like, and I can tell you right when it happened. It happened when we were studying through the book of Jonah. And I was like, I just started realizing, man, this entire Bible is about God reconciling a people from all peoples. And I think before that class, I just would have been susceptible to thinking the goal is to see as many people saved as possible. Yeah. And after that class, I realized it's about a remnant from every tribe, tongue, and nation. Yeah. And so my heart has just been radically affected by that. Man, I had a chance to go on a lot of trips. I was in Indonesia. I was in Turkey. I really thought we were going to land. I thought me and Anna were going to land in Turkey for a significant season of my life. I thought that's what we were going to do. Ended up not working out. And so we ended up, planting a church that hopefully sends hundreds.
That's awesome. You and I are both into church planting.
You're into it more than me even.
Yeah. I'm really into church.
You're wild-eyed, dude.
I get crazy talking about that stuff. But I think it was pretty, I don't know. I guess it hit me some kind of way when I first heard you talk about some of this stuff, that you don't really think about church planting for the sake of planting churches. It has a much bigger picture of what you're hoping to see happen through church planting. And I just think that would be really awesome if you kind of unpack some of that. I mean, you got into some of the language of it just now when you started talking about peoples over people and that kind of thing. But if you just kind of unpack some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I heard a guy say one time, a guy told me one time, one of my first ever fundraising meetings for church planting, I was talking to this director of missions in Florida, trying to get them to sponsor us because I was from down there. And he said, you got to be stupid or crazy to plant a church. And I know I'm not stupid, but I'm like, we're all a little bit crazy for doing this, right? Yeah. I mean, you got to admit, we're all a little bit wild-eyed here for wanting to make this our life, crazy, church planners and all that stuff. Man, I think that church planting is God's plan A for the world. I think that there's not a plan B. I think that church planting is the means by which the Great Commission is accomplished. We are called to make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and teaching them. Those are church things. Those are not things that happen at the evangelism big rally. They don't happen through FCA. I'm not saying anything about, sure. But I'm just saying that's church stuff, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. The authoritative teaching of the word, administering the ordinances of the church. Those things are meant to be going through the local assembly. Yeah. It's funny. With some of my counterparts, or not counterparts, some of my friends in ministry, they're maybe lean more 9 marks or something like that. They might look at me like I'm just too big of a big church guy, like big C church guy. Yeah. And I am way probably bigger on big C church maybe than them. But man, I think every single believer needs to belong to a local church, and that is the way, that is the vehicle. Church plantings that church plants that plant churches will go all the way to the ends of the earth. And so I mean that's how I became convinced that I wanted to do it. When I was in college, we had just graduated college, and I was still kind of bumping around the upstate of South Carolina. We got involved with a church plant, and great people. It just didn't go well. I was only there for 1 year. I was trying to do a youth group, and I was not great at that. Yeah. And then the pastors kind of got mad at each other, and they left, and I'm there, and I'm like, dude, I'm leaving. I'm going to seminary in 6 months, and it was just a whole thing. And it created a lot of immaturity, or not created, it revealed a lot of immaturity in me at that time, because the first time somebody at the summit said, do you want to plant a church? I was like, no, I'm going to go be the pastor of a real church. Right. Not a church plant. Because I just didn't have in my head the theology of planting to the ends of the earth, that this is how the Great Commission goes forward. Man, the summit was so gracious in taking young, immature, but hungry guys and sort of beating some sense into us over 5 years. That's how when I was there. And so that flipped, where we began, I saw it as something I would never want to do to something that I wanted to do with all my heart and give my life to, in hopes that we would kind of be a drop in that bucket, right? Like you plant the church, it multiplies, it adds to the kingdom, and eventually you fill something up so tight that it spills over into nations and sending all over the world. Yeah. And we're seeing that. Yeah.
I just love that the way we get to the nations is by planting churches. So we plant more churches, and more churches are going to send more people to the nations.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a Breaking Barriers podcast. I think we got to put this in. And the assumption is that those churches grow. Right. That they literally add people. Right. That they share the gospel with people, that they preach sermons that are evangelistic, so if you got one thing that becomes 2, but they don't add,
that's division.
It's actually division, not multiplication, right? So the idea of multiplying to the ends of the earth is, man, we're planting things that we are hoping and are willing to say out loud are going to get bigger. Right. And we're excited for that. That's a good thing. That's the kingdom stuff. That's good.
We certainly don't want to plant churches that aren't growing, that are just kind of sitting there. The whole purpose is to reach more people. Right. So that more people can go.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Hey, so, we're chasing the vision that you kind of cast for the church right now of by 2032 to be able to see 5,000 people baptized and 500 people sent out. And so in looking at that, I just want to get you to think a little bit about the future, because I've heard you talk about this, that loosely, that you and Anna kind of have this vision of you're going to pastor Mercy Hill for about 30 years, and then when exactly 30 years, exactly 30 years, and then that you would go to the nations yourselves and spend some time there. Now I know there are things that are at play there that could throw some of that stuff off and all that, but when you begin to think about that, when you think about the number 500, that's by 32. When you've been here for 30 years, well, that'll be just 10 years beyond that at 2042.
Right.
So we know the number is going to be a lot bigger than 500 by that time. But what number would you just kind of project that you think you would be?
Man, you're talking to an analytical from StrengthsFinder. You know, that
dude.
This is fun though. It's fun for you. I can't answer in a way that I haven't already thought through a million times. Hey, I'll answer your question, but you got to answer me a question.
Okay.
You've told me the story about how you ended up at Mercy Hill with Felicia's line about one church in the world, and all, right?
Yeah.
And that is because that is a wrestling match for all of us.
Sure.
I mean, I'm sure you've wrestled with it. I mean, you planted a church, like you probably have thought about the nations or whatever. I preached a sermon on Psalm 67 just this past weekend. I wrestle with it now. Like, man, how do I stay?
Yeah.
How do we stay? You know, and I just thought your story from how you landed at Mercy Hill is the way I've thought about that first 30 years of my ministry, and then I'll answer your question.
Okay. You want me to talk about that?
Yeah, just talk about it. I mean, I love the line.
So I'll do two things. There's also, we were getting involved before we were thinking about Mercy Hill and having the conversations here and all that. We've been doing a lot of work in Quebec, the province in Canada, and we just fell in love with the people that were there. And so Felicia and I started praying, hey, God, would you send us there? And the answer, as we were praying through that, was clearly you can send way more people than you can impact if you go yourself. So it was just stay, so we just kind of wrestled with that for a while and then said, okay, that's what we're going to do. When I was trying to decide about coming to Mercy Hill, I mean, both jobs were going to be awesome. I loved the job that I was in before I came here, working with all the collegiate stuff, with the convention. And so we're trying to figure out which one of these is right. And I think the answer is both of them are good,
Yeah.
But we're laying there trying to decide. And I'm like, Felicia, what do you think? And she says, hey, Jonathan, this is what I think you have to decide. Do you want to continue working with a few hundred churches to impact the state of North Carolina? Or do you want to work with one church that will impact the world? And I said, decision made.
Does she typically have a lot of mic drop moments like that?
She does. She does, man.
Okay.
She's just like super wise when it comes to that stuff, and we're processing things as a family. There have just been numerous times when God has just used her to bring lots of clarity to her.
Well, I appreciate you telling that story. I know it's a personal story, but the reason I wanted you to say it is because I think that is the wrestling match that we've all got to go through is where's my biggest impact? And I think for many of us, the biggest impact that we can make may not be on the field.
Yeah.
But hear me say, at the same time, more Christians should go than are.
That's right.
So I've had to wrestle with that. The way we've thought about it is, man, I don't know how this will work out, but I planted the church when I was 28, and so it's like 30 years, 58. Hopefully if I can, God's favor, and I try to, take care of my mind and take care of my body, that we'll be, we'll have a lot of years left of fruitful ministry. But dude, at 58, somebody else can carry this thing.
Yeah.
I think, and so I've just thought about it. I want to be in a financial position where I'm not trying to tie it up. So I got to stay somewhere too long. Like I want to be able to walk away. And we, I don't know if it's 58, but I've kind of said 30 years. And yeah, man, the plan is that we would go to the field. I hear that call for the Masters. There's going to be a lot of people in the field that kids need grandparents over there, and they need mentors. They need people that have seen a lot of life. And so, yeah, that's been our thought, is that we would go not only for one term, but we would try to go for 2 terms. But caveat, man, God has just blessed us with this beautiful little, chosen baby. And she's almost 8 years old now. And I have no idea if me and Anna will probably never be empty nesters. That's not going to be a phase in our life, which we're fine with. Yeah. It's fine, man. It's like, that's fine. But I also don't know what that means, with our little baby girl when she has special needs, if we can do it. So maybe God's going to birth a new dream. I don't know what he's going to do, but I think it will be something nations related. Yeah. After I'm done doing what I'm doing here.
You didn't answer it.
I hope that we would be in the 1500s.
Okay, awesome.
Because if it takes the church about 15 years, it takes the church 20 years to get to 500.
Yeah.
My prayer is that we'd be in a place where we could double that in half the time.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So it'd be 1,010.
It's just snowballing.
Yeah, that's the hope.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So,
and this has been a fun.
Yeah, this is fun, man. Thanks for teeing all this stuff up, dude.
Hey, could you take just the last couple of minutes here to talk about the Rich Birch one-day thing?
Hey, Rich Birch is coming for our one-day Breaking Barriers event for this quarter, November 19th. Guys, I don't know how you are with church marketing and that kind of stuff. We can all grow in these areas, and our church personally has learned a ton from Rich Birch. He is coming to do this as an absolute personal favor to us. And he's great, man. He's just great at this stuff. He thinks about it really well. He has led in multiple high-level churches where this was his gig. He helps churches all over the country do this. We trust him to the point where we're going to be bringing a bunch of business leaders in to talk about marketing in their businesses with him, even though he's a church guy. So that's going to be November 19th. Already about 50 people signed up for that. And we don't, this is not like an unlimited. I don't know what the seating capacity is, but we probably won't let it run all that much higher. So if you want to get in with it, and make sure to sign up on our Breaking Growth Barriers website.